And welcome back to Subculture. Well, we are returning back to the Melbourne International Comedy Festival right now to take a look at another show that is happening at this year's festival. It's called Tales of Colour, and we've actually got Kurt Sterling, who is part of this show, on the phone right now to chat a little bit about it. Kurt, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Dave. Thanks for having me. Really excited to talk about Tales of Colour.
Now, Kurt, tell us a little bit about Tales of Colour. What can people expect to see if they head along to this show?
So the show is a double act show, so there's two of us. And what we like to say is that it's kind of two opposite perspectives on kind of not fitting in. So myself, I'm originally from a rural area in Australia, and I found myself kind of going overseas, living in Saudi Arabia, starting a family in Morocco, getting arrested at the Iraq border. So kind of, I went overseas into an environment that was kind of very unfamiliar to me, and got in a lot of chaotic and hilarious situations. And my co-collaborator on the show, Naza, he grew up in rural Zimbabwe. He was actually a World Vision sponsor child, and he moved to Australia when he was 11 years old, and kind of was dropped straight into a Sydney school, not speaking a word of English, and just had to survive from day one. So what we love about the show is it's like two kind of very different stories, but there's a central theme to it, which is, finding the positive side of not fitting in. And what we love about the show as well is how much audiences in the past have, found their own meaning in the show. Because, even though the things we're describing are very unusual, everyone's felt that the kind of situation of not fitting in or being in a foreign environment.
So how did you and Naza first meet? How did you come to work on this show together?
So we met on the kind of open mic scene in Sydney. So we were both doing stand-up comedy, and we were both relatively early in when we met. I think done it only for a month or two, and it was one of those ones where when you meet someone and you just have that connection and kind of you realize how much you have in common, and we instantly kind of clicked. And so we were spending a lot of time together. We were helping each other with our comedy writing, and the interesting thing about doing comedy in shows and doing kind of 5-minute sets and things like that is it's very hard to talk about very complex things. So to get on stage and start talking about I got married in Morocco, blah blah blah. It's kind of the audience reaction is like, whoa, we only know you for 30 seconds. What are you talking about? And so we both see ourselves as storytellers, and we really wanted to kind of put together a show where we have that space to kind of take the audience on the journey. And so yeah, we had the idea to have the show and started working on it together. And we performed it for the first time last year at the Factory Theatre in Sydney, and then took it to Sydney Fringe. And it went so well, we decided this year to take it on the road to Melbourne.
I was going to ask that because you actually sold out at Sydney Fringe last year, and I mean sold out in the good way, sold out with tickets. How did that journey then come to Melbourne? Like, was that a big discussion that you and Naza had about coming down to the Melbourne International Comedy Festival?
I think it's a logical next step. I mean, I think for us the show went well, and we kind of see it as like, it's a show, but it's also like something that we want to share with people. You know what I mean? I think it's a powerful story, and yeah, it basically felt like the logical next step to kind of reach more people, to come down to Melbourne.
Now, I have to ask, how did you end up living in the Middle East? How did that journey happen in your life? And what's that like now, sitting back and writing stories about that?
So it was really cool. So I grew up on the Central Coast in New South Wales, which is a relatively kind of working class area. The one thing I had going for me as a child was I was really good at maths. And so I'll jump ahead quite a bit in the story, but basically that led to me getting a job, a pretty good corporate job that gave me the opportunity basically to fly around and do projects all around the world. And so, they'd come to me and say, hey, we've got a project in Saudi Arabia for a year. Do you want to go? and I was kind of taking the approach of just saying yes to everything at that point. And so for example, Saudi was literally, I got an email on Friday, hey, we're looking for someone to go to Saudi for a year. Do you want to go? And I say yes, and I'm on a plane on Monday to Riyadh. And so, yeah, it was, and I did this, by the way, for about 10 years, and lived in Paris for a year, lived in Singapore for 3 years. So it was kind of really this kind of crazy journey. But honestly, it was incredible. It was chaotic. It was incredible, but I'm very lucky to have had that opportunity. I wouldn't have spent my 20s any other way.
Now I have to ask, how do your audiences take the news that you were arrested on the Iraqi border? Because one of the bits that I've mentioned in my stand-up before was I had a very interesting incident that happened in Malaysia where I came face-to-face with a police officer carrying an M16 who had to ask me the question, do you want to tell us about the gun, sir? And the audiences love that story. So how do the audiences react to your story about being arrested on the Iraqi border?
I think the same thing. I feel like people love the tension of that type of situation. I feel like the important thing is it's good in the show to be able to set up who you are so people understand why you're in that situation to begin with. Because a lot of people will say, well, I would never be, I'd never be in that situation. But it's a lot of fun. So I mean, for me, it was I was working in Kuwait, which is a small country that borders Iraq. And it's a beautiful country. There's not a lot. It's very safe. There's not a lot to do. And on a weekend, I found myself kind of looking at Google Maps and sort of thinking, what am I going to do today? And I was very surprised to see that the Iraq border is only 2 hours away, which is kind of like driving from, Melbourne to Bendigo. I mean, it doesn't feel like a big deal. So I was like, why don't I'll rent a Nissan Pajero and kind of drive, and I'll just drive until it feels unsafe or someone stops me, and then I'll turn around, and I'll probably see something, but it won't be a big deal. And to my surprise, I could just drive all the way to the border, and no one stopped me until obviously you're at the border, and it becomes very obvious very quickly that you shouldn't be there when people start looking very confused about this Australian man in a rented Jeep trying to cross the border. But audiences love it, and I feel like the beauty of seeing it in the show is you really can set up that character and people understand why you're there, and therefore why it's so ridiculous but also so funny.
Definitely. Now, for you personally, working with Naza, what's that been like, and hearing his stories as well, because his stories are very much part of this show as well. What's that been like for you, being able to sit down and hear some of his stories?
It's been incredible, Dave. So, I mean, what I would say is that, I really felt like I learned something in the process of sitting down with Naza and helping him write his show. So obviously we wrote the show together. It's our own jokes and things, but it was a collaborative process. And, it's crazy that you can be friends with someone and be very good friends with someone, but then you sit down and you start, helping them write their story, and you realize, wow, like I didn't know any of this stuff about you.
Yeah.
And it's really powerful. And that's one of the reasons why I think we believe so much in the show, was like how impactful that process of just even doing it together was. And there was a lot of things that I learned from him that I feel helped me have more compassion for people maybe who've had his journey.
Yeah.
People who've come not speaking English as a first language, people who may have come to Australia in more difficult circumstances, and obviously I feel like we all have compassion for people in those circumstances, but really understanding the individual story, I feel like it really took it to a next level, and I feel like I really understand the world, honestly, more thoroughly having heard Naza's story and being able to ask him questions about it.
Definitely. Well, for all of our listeners out there, if you do want to head along and check out Naza and Kurt at Tales of Colour, the show is on the 29th and 30th of March, and then from the 3rd to the 7th of April, it's on at 6 o'clock and 5 p.m. different nights, so just check online to check which nights or what time. And it's at the Collection Bar, and of course we will have all the ticket information and everything up on subcultureentertainment.com. There'll be a link that you'll be able to go across and get tickets for the show. at. And to finish off, Kurt, what would you like to say to people out there who are thinking about heading along and checking out Tales of Colour?
I think it's going to be an awesome night. We've been working on the show for a while. The show's great, but also, it's really important for us to create a really good vibe in the room, and we always have a blast with the audience. So please come along, and it'd be great to meet anyone who's listening.
That would be awesome. And again, for all the listeners out there, Tales of Colour is on the 29th and 30th of March, and then from the 3rd to the 7th of April, 6 o'clock and 5 o'clock on different nights. So just check the Comedy Festival website to see what time it is on each night. It's at the Collection Bar, and you can find all of that information up on subcultureentertainment.com, along with a link to be able to go and grab tickets.